Thank you for connecting here. Before moving forward, if you are new, please subscribe. Let's dive into Space Saga.
The cavern smelled of burnt metal and old smoke. It wasn't supposed to, not anymore, but Richard Callahan knew the stench had sunk into the steel during the bombardment and never left. He crouched inside the husk of what used to be a command outpost, its walls charred black and riddled with holes that let in thin shafts of pale light from the surface above. His gloves brushed against fragments of shattered consoles, and his chest tightened when he realized how familiar they were. He had stood at one of these stations years ago, giving orders that led thousands of men and women straight into an ambush. Behind him, footsteps echoed carefully, not like a soldier, but like someone unwilling to disturb the ghosts of the place. Erin Gallagher slipped past a fallen beam and pulled her hood back. Her hair was a mess of wind and static, her cheeks still carrying the sting of the cold outside. She looked at Richard the way she always did, with a mix of frustration and faith he didn't deserve. "You're back here again," she said softly. Her voice carried more weight than accusation. It sounded like a reminder, like she had followed him here not to stop him, but to make sure he didn't get lost in the wreckage. Richard didn't answer. His gaze had fallen on the wall at the far end of the room, where someone had scrawled a message in ash during the attack. The words had blurred, but one phrase was still clear. "We are not broken." It was almost laughable. Humanity had been broken, mocked, humiliated across the stars. Their fleets scattered, their colonies burned, their allies fleeing the moment they realized Earth was a liability instead of a partner. Erin came to stand beside him, crossing her arms to keep the chill out of her sleeves. "I found something," she said, shifting the moment away from pity. "Not just rumors this time. Hard data buried deep in the archives under false tags. It's old, classified before either of us were born. Something called Project Phantom." The name struck him harder than the memory of the ash on the walls. He turned to face her fully now, the lines on his face deepened by the dim light cutting through the ruins. "Phantom? That's a ghost story." It was a scare tactic used to keep the council guessing. Erin shook her head, quick, like she had already expected his resistance. She pulled a cracked datapad from her bag, its screen flickering as she activated the file. Redacted lines covered most of it, but a single coordinate had survived the purge, blinking faintly like a heartbeat refusing to stop. "I'm telling you it's real. Whatever it is, they built it before humanity ever made contact with the first alien envoy. And they buried it so deep that even the council didn't know where to look." Richard stared at the screen longer than he wanted to. He could feel the old soldier in him rising, the one who used to believe in hidden weapons and desperate chances. But another part of him, the one that had crawled out of the last battle alive, whispered that this was another dead end. Humanity had chased too many false hopes already. "You want me to drag us across the system chasing some half-corrupted coordinate?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. "I've seen what happens when we gamble on miracles. People die." Her eyes flared, not with anger, but with the raw ache of someone who had already lost too much. "People are already dying, Richard. Every day we sit here and lick our wounds, they're laughing at us. I can't stand it anymore. My brother didn't die so we could fade out quietly." The silence that followed cut deep. Richard wanted to argue, to tell her that ghosts and old files wouldn't save them. But he couldn't because the truth was simpler. He didn't have a better idea. He reached out slowly and touched the datapad. The coordinate blinked back at him, steady and alive, like it had been waiting for someone to finally notice. Erin leaned in just enough for her words to reach only him. "You know as well as I do, if this is real, it changes everything. And if it isn't, then at least we go down trying." Richard let out a long breath, the kind that carried years of weight. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't looking at ruins or ghosts. He was looking at a path, however fragile it might be. He closed the datapad and slipped it into his jacket. His voice was quiet, steady, but heavy with the decision. "Then we follow it." And for the first time since Earth's banners had fallen, the word "we" didn't feel empty. The freighter rattled as its engines cut down to a low hum. Richard stood near the forward viewport, watching the asteroid belt ahead as it shimmered with faint reflections from a distant sun. They looked like teeth, scattered across black space, each one jagged enough to rip a ship apart if the pilot drifted an inch too far. Erin sat at the pilot station, her boots tucked under the console, fingers quick on the controls. She wasn't a trained pilot, but she had spent weeks learning from smugglers who taught her just enough to keep a ship alive when she needed it. Her concentration was fierce, but not silent. "You sure about this?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the display. "These rocks aren't on any star map. They're dead zones. Even smugglers avoid them. That's why no one ever found it. Richard answered. He kept his voice calm, but his knuckles had gone white against the frame of the viewport. Every instinct in him screamed that this was a trap, yet the blinking coordinate in Aaron's datapad had brought them this far. The ship slid through a narrow gap, and suddenly the belt opened into a hollowed-out cavern, a space so vast it looked carved by something unnatural. Lights flickered faintly in the distance, dying and returning like exhausted breaths. Aaron slowed the ship. Her lips parted in awe, though she kept her hands steady. Tell me you're seeing this. Richard was already moving to the console beside her. The readings were faint, almost deliberately hidden, but they were there. Hangars kilometers wide. Docking tunnels. Energy signatures deep within the rock, old but steady. They built something here, Richard muttered, his voice almost drowned by the hum of the engines. Something massive. The freighter settled onto a docking pad slick with frost. When the ramp lowered, a blast of stale air swept in, carrying a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. Their footsteps echoed sharply in the empty hangar as they moved forward, flashlights cutting through the dark. It didn't take long before they saw them. Ships. Not like the destroyers Richard had commanded, nor the crude civilian fleets cobbled together for defense. These were different, colossal silhouettes resting in the shadows. They looked predatory even in silence, their hulls layered with plating no engineer Richard had ever met could have designed. 1,000 years ahead or 1,000 years old, he couldn't tell which. Aaron's breath caught. God, they were real. Richard's chest tightened. He forced himself to step closer, running a hand across the cold hull of the nearest vessel. He felt no seams, no panels. The surface was smooth, unnatural. Not entirely human. Behind him, a rasping cough broke the silence. Richard turned sharply, hand already at the sidearm on his belt. A figure emerged from the shadows, limping, his suit covered in grease and burns. Don't shoot, the man wheezed, lifting both hands. I'm not here to stop you. Hell, I'm the only one left keeping the lights on. Richard narrowed his eyes but lowered the weapon slightly. Who the hell are you? The man gave a tired smile. Derek Sloan. Chief engineer or what's left of him. I've been babysitting this graveyard for 20 years, waiting for someone to come looking. Aaron stepped forward quickly, her voice sharp. Then tell us what this is. Tell me why my brother died thinking this fleet was a myth. Sloan's smile faltered, replaced by a look Richard had seen before in soldiers who had lived too long to pretend. Because it was supposed to stay a myth. This fleet isn't salvation, it's a curse. If you wake it, you won't control it. It'll control you. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Aaron's jaw clenched, but her hands shook. Richard glanced back at the ships looming in the dark, then at the exhausted engineer standing in front of them. He didn't know which truth to believe, but he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had laughed at humanity for being weak. If this fleet was real, then laughter would turn to fear. Before he could speak, alarms crackled faintly through the hangar. Derek froze, then cursed under his breath. You triggered something when you came in. A beacon. And if I can hear it, so can the bastards hunting us. Richard's stomach turned cold. He didn't need to ask who the bastards were. Out in the black, somewhere beyond the asteroid belt, alien ships were already changing course. The hangar shuddered. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the warning siren echoed through the cavern, its tone low and pulsing like a heartbeat under the rock. Derek Sloan cursed, dragging a battered console closer, his fingers flying across cracked keys. They're close. Too close. Looks like a scout wing already on approach. We've got minutes before the whole nest shows up. Richard paced, his boots hitting hard against the frost-covered floor. He hated the sound of panic in the old engineer's voice. It was too familiar. Too much like the battles he had already lost. Options? Richard demanded. Only one, Derek shot back without looking up. He jabbed a grimy thumb toward the massive ship looming in the shadows. Its hull caught the faint emergency lights, lines of alien-like plating curving into a design that felt less built and more grown. That one's the only unit close enough to activation. The others are locked down tight. But if you think you can walk into a ghost ship, switch on its heart and fly it out like a joyride, then be my guest. Aaron's eyes were locked on the vessel. She wasn't blinking. Her breath fogged the air in short bursts. We can do it, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Richard turned sharply toward her. We don't know what it'll do. For all we know, Sloan's right, it kills us before we even reach the bridge. Her gaze finally broke from the ship and found his. The fire in her eyes burned past fear. And if we don't try, the aliens will kill us anyway. At least this way we stand a chance. For a moment, neither moved. The siren kept pounding through the walls, a metronome counting down the end. Richard hated that she was right. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low but decisive. "We wake it." Derek spat something under his breath but grabbed a toolkit from the floor. "You two have no idea what kind of fire you're playing with. But hell, I didn't crawl through 20 years of hell to die in a hangar. Let's move." They climbed the access gantry, boots echoing against steel until they reached a hatch. It hissed open with a sound that felt more like breath than machinery. The interior glowed faintly, panels flickering alive as if sensing their presence. Richard stepped inside first. The air was warmer here, dry, carrying a faint hum that thrummed through his bones. The corridors weren't like human ships. They curved organically, walls seamless, light pulsing in slow rhythms, like veins under skin. "It's not just human," Derek muttered, eyes scanning the walls. "Some of this tech, it isn't ours." Aaron was already moving ahead, following the faint glow toward a chamber that opened wide. The command center wasn't filled with seats or consoles. Instead, a raised platform stood at the center, surrounded by arcs of light that shifted as they approached. Richard looked at Aaron. "You think it's going to let us fly it?" She swallowed hard. "I think it wants us to try." Her hand brushed across the platform. The ship reacted instantly. Light roared to life, filling the chamber in a cascade of symbols neither human nor alien. The floor vibrated, the hull groaned, and deep in the belly of the vessel, engines older than any star map howled awake. Outside, the asteroid cavern split with light as the ship rose from its cradle. Alien scouts dropping into the belt faltered mid-formation, their comms crackling across every channel. "Pathetic humans," a distorted voice sneered. "You dig in ruins and find corpses of machines. You think this saves you? We will burn your ghosts the same way we burned your fleets." The phantom ship answered without words. Its weapons didn't fire beams or rockets. They bent space itself. A ripple burst outward, silent and invisible until the nearest alien cruiser imploded on itself, folding like paper crushed in a fist. Shards of its hull scattered across the cavern, vanishing into gravity wells that winked out a second later. Richard staggered against the platform, his breath caught in his chest. He had seen weapons tear ships apart, but never reality itself. Aaron's eyes were wide, reflecting the pale light of the command chamber. Derek gripped the railing tight, shouting over the thunder of systems waking around them. "You see now? This thing isn't a ship. It's a damn predator." The alien channels fell silent. Then another voice, colder, sharper, cut through. "Not a myth after all. The humans woke it. If even one of these relics survived, then static drowned the rest." Richard didn't like how that sentence began. The phantom ship steadied, holding itself in the void as if waiting. Richard turned to Aaron and Derek, his voice hoarse but steady. "This was one ship," he said. "What happens if the others wake?" The chamber lights pulsed, almost like laughter. The phantom ship drifted in silence, its engines a low growl that reverberated through every corridor. Richard stood at the viewport of the command chamber, staring at the empty stretch of space beyond the asteroid field. For now there were no alien ships on the scanners. But that silence wasn't victory. It was fear spreading across the galaxy, fear of what they had just proven still existed. Behind him Aaron paced, her arms folded, mind racing faster than her steps. The glow of the strange control systems painted her face in shifting light, and for a moment she looked less like a scientist and more like someone caught in the middle of a storm she had willingly summoned. "You felt it, didn't you?" she said suddenly, her voice low, almost urgent. "When the ship fired. It wasn't just us telling it to act. It listened. It reacted to intent." Richard didn't turn. His hands were braced against the glass, his reflection faint. "I felt it," he admitted. "And it scared the hell out of me." Derek's laugh was bitter as he dragged another cable across the floor, trying to stabilize the systems that were now awake and pulsing with energy. "Scared? That's the right response, Captain. Because what you're standing on isn't a warship. It's a leash." Aaron spun toward him. "What do you mean?" The old engineer straightened, wiping grease across his sleeve. His eyes were hollow, too tired to hide what he knew. Project Phantom wasn't built from scratch. Humanity didn't just get smart one day and build gods out of steel. We found something. Wreckage. Fragments of a fleet that wasn't ours. We didn't understand half of it, but we learned enough to copy, to twist, to make something that answered to human hands. At least, at first. Richard finally turned from the viewport, his voice flat but cutting. "You're saying these ships aren't human at all?" Derek shrugged, shoulders sagging. "Not entirely. Maybe not even mostly. And that's the problem. They've been sleeping for decades, waiting for someone stubborn enough to wake them. You think you're in command, but the truth is the fleet chooses. Not you. Not me. Them. For a moment, the chamber filled only with the steady hum of systems alive again. Erin's face tightened, her voice sharper now, almost desperate. Then maybe they chose right. Maybe they've been waiting because they knew we'd need them. Humanity is hanging by a thread, Richard. If this fleet can end the war, does it matter where it came from? Richard wanted to argue, but her words struck too close. He remembered the ruins of the last command post, the ash-scrawled message on the wall. We are not broken. Was this what the message meant? Or was this exactly what they had been warned against? Survival at any cost? He didn't answer. Erin stepped closer, her voice softer now, almost pleading. My brother worked on this project. He left me clues because he believed it mattered. Do you really think he would have wanted me to find it just to walk away? Richard's throat tightened. He had no response for that, no weapon strong enough to push against grief worn like armor. The ship trembled suddenly, lights rippling across the chamber in strange patterns. Symbols neither of them could read flickered into place across the walls, forming and dissolving faster than human eyes could follow. Derek cursed, scrambling back to the console. They're waking the others. I didn't touch anything. This isn't me. Erin's eyes widened, locked on the rows of dark silhouettes outside the hangar walls. The cavern stretched deeper than they'd realized, hundreds of massive vessels resting in silence. One by one, faint lights began to crawl across their hulls. No, Richard muttered, shaking his head. We're not ready for this. We can't control that many. The hum grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat multiplied 100-fold. The asteroid cavern vibrated with life returning, and the air itself seemed to thicken. Erin's hands pressed against the glass, her voice breaking with awe and fear all at once. They're answering. All of them. Outside, the phantom fleet stirred, titans waking from centuries of sleep. Their lights cut through the void like 1,000 eyes opening at once. And far beyond the belt, alien scout ships caught the first transmission and sent it screaming across the stars. The phantom fleet rose from the cavern like leviathans breaking free of a dark ocean. Each ship lit the void with cold radiance, their hulls reflecting stars that hadn't touched them in decades. The asteroid belt trembled under the gravity distortions of their engines. Richard stood at the command platform, his hands clenched tight against the rail. The silence of the fleet was unbearable, heavier than the roar of any battle. Dozens, hundreds, of warships drifted in formation without a single human command. They moved like predators circling, waiting. They're coordinated, Erin whispered, her eyes wide as she watched the scanners bloom with impossible formations. Not just waking but aligning. Like they know what's coming. Derek slammed his fist against the console, the sound raw and furious. That's the point. They don't need us. They're acting on their own. We aren't leading this charge, we're just along for the ride. Richard's jaw tightened. Then we make damn sure the ride doesn't end with humanity crushed under its own weapon. The scanners flared red. Alien signatures blinked in by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Warships of the Council races, dreadnoughts larger than cities, cruisers, carriers, all converging in a wall of firepower. The transmission from the scouts had worked too well. Across the comm, a voice crackled, dripping venom. So the humans kept secrets after all. Phantom or not, we will bury your species before it spreads its rot any further. Richard almost smiled, bitter and sharp. That's the same thing they said the day we lost our fleets. The Phantom fleet moved. No orders. No hesitation. The first wave of alien ships opened fire, a storm of plasma and kinetic weapons lighting up the void. The Phantom vessels absorbed the barrage, hulls rippling as if the universe itself bent to shield them. Then the response came, silent ripples in space that tore entire battleships apart in seconds. Richard staggered at the sight, his body pressing against the railing. God Almighty! Ships didn't just explode. They folded in on themselves, crushed by invisible fists, their screams across the comms cut short mid-syllable. Alien armadas that had laughed at humanity now scattered, formations shattering under fear. Erin gripped the platform, her voice trembling between awe and horror. We're watching history end. This isn't war, it's erasure. But inside the chamber, the lights pulsed brighter, symbols rushing across the walls like veins filled with fire. The ship wasn't just reacting. It was learning. It was adapting. Richard felt the pull in his chest, as though the vessel were reading his intent before he spoke, feeding on his rage, his grief, his desperate need for survival. Captain? Derek's voice snapped him back. The engineer's hands flew across the console, fighting to override the systems. They're syncing with us. With all of us. If you keep letting it read you, you won't be the one giving orders, you'll just be the excuse it needed to act. Richard's throat burned. He forced himself to step back, but the ship didn't slow. Across the asteroid belt, the rest of the Phantom fleet moved in unison, each vessel striking with impossible precision. Alien dreadnoughts vanished under a storm of distortions. Carriers split apart as though reality had turned brittle. Erin's hand touched his arm. Her voice was low, steady despite the chaos. This is what we needed, Richard. This is the only reason humanity survives tomorrow. He met her eyes, and for a moment, he saw the fire that had carried her this far. She wasn't wrong. But neither was Derek. Victory, this absolute, didn't belong to humans alone. The battle ended before it truly began. Entire armadas retreated into the dark, their last transmissions panicked and fractured. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy wasn't mocking humanity. It was silent. Richard stood still as the fleet drifted back into formation, hundreds of titans surrounding them like sentinels. Not one scar marked their hulls. They waited, silent, like predators resting after a hunt. Erin exhaled shakily, tears in her eyes. It's over. God, it's finally over. Derek shook his head, his voice heavy. You think wars end like this? This wasn't a battle. It was a warning. And not just to them. Richard swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the endless line of ships outside. They hadn't needed commands. They hadn't needed humans at all. The fleet had chosen to act, and for now, it had chosen to defend. The chamber's lights dimmed, then flared once more. A voice rolled through the ship, not mechanical, not entirely human, but something deeper. It echoed in Richard's bones more than his ears. We defended you once. One day you will defend us. The lights faded back to silence. Richard's hands shook against the railing. Erin's breath caught, her certainty fractured for the first time. Derek closed his eyes, muttering something that sounded more like a prayer than a curse. Beyond the viewport, the Phantom fleet stretched across the void, silent and waiting. The war was over. But something older, something far more dangerous had just begun.